Hi, I'm Katy Young with Witt Kieffer Search, and I'm here today at NACDA with two of my favorite people, both athletic directors, great athletic directors, really awesome people as well. Been lucky to know both of these guys for a long time. This is Ed McLaughlin at VCU and Rick Hart at SMU. And we're going to talk today a little bit about hiring first-time head coaches, so new head coaches, new to your program, but also new to being a head coach. So, tell me a little bit about what you look for in a head coach, maybe someone who's been an assistant for a long time, and how do you know they're ready?
Well, it's the leadership qualities. Ed and I were just talking about hiring coaches in general, not only first-time head coaches, but it's an inexact science, and it's one of those roles that until you've done it, you don't know if you can be successful doing it or not. It's a great departure from being a coordinator in the case of football or an assistant coach in the case of other sports. And so really, I counted before I came today. I didn't realize that we have 6 first-time head coaches at SMU, and in each case, it's can they lead? What kind of person are they? And again, you don't know, but are they going to be able to be that same person under pressure? Are they going to be able to make those same decisions and remain aligned with the values and the culture that you've created and are creating when it matters and when it impacts them and their families. And so that's what I'm trying to get at the root of when I'm looking to hire any coach, but in particular someone who hasn't been in that role before.
Yeah, I mean, I've hired a bunch of first-time head coaches at 2 different stops now, and for me, we want someone who comes from a championship culture. I mean, it's someone who's won championships as an assistant, who's seen really good coaches and learned from really good coaches. I don't think it's reasonable to have NCAA tournament expectations for someone who's never coached in the NCAA tournament, never gotten a team there, never understood how much you have to believe in process to get there. As Rick said, you have to have some type of leadership. It's a lot different, whatever that cliche is, 18 inches across the seat or whatever that is. I don't
Move down a chair.
Move down a chair. I don't really follow those closely, but I will say this: head coaches need to worry about the big stuff. Win, recruit, and graduate. That's why our baseball coach is a terrific coach. When he became a head coach, I said, write down these 3 words: win, recruit, and graduate. Because the other stuff, how long the shorts are for practice, you don't need to worry about anymore. You need to worry about those things. But that's what leadership is delegating. It's making sure you can set the right culture for your program and give the coaches the confidence as first-timers too, because you can't have someone who's going to worry about being able to do the job.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's great. So how do you get them acclimated? Once you've hired them, how do you get them really ingrained on the campus with your constituencies and everyone else across the campus? How do you really get them to feel, part of the team and confident that they can take that team to the next level?
Well, that is important, and because particularly for a first-time head coach, maybe there's not a level of familiarity, but you have to have that plan developed and ready to go prior to the hire. So we all know those processes can happen very quickly. Mm-hmm. But you need to be prepared, and that's where you utilize your staff. Prepared with a plan, ready to execute a plan, and place priorities on who, when, where, because you can stumble, and you can really make the job more difficult for that individual if you don't get them in front of the right constituencies at the right time, mm-hmm. in the right order, and so on. And so I think giving great thought to that whole process, including post-hire, and having a team of people who can help to execute that plan is very, very important, because you want to set them up for success. And you want to make sure coming in that they're able to position themselves in the program right away to start to share the vision and implement the plan.
Yeah, I mean, that plan for us has always been, who do you really need to get to know in the community? Who do you really need to get to know on your campus? And who do you need to get to know in your department? And helping that head coach do it first, because they're going to be so scattered with everything and overwhelmed with everything with being a first-time coach. I mean, head coach, given them the guidance and talking with them every day. I know Rick does it too, but when you have a new head coach, you have to talk to them every day and make sure that they know that you're there with them, mm-hmm. and working with them, or whoever the sport program administrator is. But just holding their hand is not the right way to say it, but really guiding them along and making sure they understand how to prioritize things, because it's much more than just, I spent 3 hours planning practice today, right? As assistants, they're always focused on planning practice and those things. Well, you can plan practice for a little bit, but you have to go see this donor, or you have to go to this, talk to these folks at admissions, and make sure that they understand that they're an advocate for your department in every way, shape, and form.
Terrific. So tell me about staff. So when a new coach comes in, how important is it that they have a former head coach or someone who's been a head coach as a top assistant on their staff? Does it vary by sport, or do you think that that's important?
It's ideal. It's not always achievable. And I think, in my experience, you talk to that coach very deliberately with great intention about their plan for their staff. Mm-hmm. That's probably, if there's a mistake that's most common with a first-time head coach, it's probably how they staff, and why they make the decisions they do in terms of who they're going to bring in. So, I've been very intentional with them about, are you thinking about, do you have someone, whether they've been a head coach or it's someone who's a long-time coach, and to Ed's point, the types of programs they've been around and so on, who can help guide you and be a peer within your staff that you would trust, that you can listen to, that can maybe help show you some things that I'm not going to be able to as an athletics director, and really give great thought to that. So I think ideally, yes, you definitely try to encourage them to have a presence on their staff from someone who can lend that voice that you maybe can't lend, particularly in that first year or two, as they're getting used to being the head coach.
Yeah, Rick brings up a really good point, that the sort of voice of reason, you can't always have a former head coach doing it. We'd love to. Yeah. I mean, it'd be great, but you can't always have a former head coach on the staff, so that voice of reason is important. I think in our business now, we tend to, especially in Olympic sports, hire a lot of younger coaches. Mm-hmm. So having a younger coach who has a sort of voice of reason, a presence there to be able to tell, hey, coach, it's going to be okay, or calm the person down, or whatever, that's incredibly helpful. The other thing I always like to say is, you got to hire someone who's not you. Believe the same things that you believe, and want the culture to be the same, but you can't have the same personalities across the coaching staff, or they're going to be either super high or super low all the time, but never in the middle. And the kids, or student athletes, they deserve something that's in the middle. They deserve balance and calm all the time and at the right time. So, hire people that aren't like you in a lot of ways. I think a lot of us try to do that as administrators. Mm-hmm. Surround yourselves with people who aren't like you, who are really good at what they do. But first-time head coaches really kind of, they fixate on it being, we got to hire someone just like me. I'm going to hire all young people to go out and recruit like crazy. Mm-hmm. Well, that's great, except when you want to kick a kid off the team for a small thing. Mm-hmm. You need a little voice of reason to say, okay, things are going to be fine. We're not going to do this, or they're not hard enough on the discipline, and they need to be a lot more so, because they're so worried about winning that they're willing to compromise. You have to make sure you get those things in the right place, that they have a staff that can balance them out, because it's a lot more pressure for them than anything they've ever been used to.
Mm-hmm. So let's go back to the interview process. When you're interviewing a head coach, say you've got 5 assistants, what differentiates them? I know you talked a little bit about leadership, and how do you pick someone who doesn't have a demonstrated record of achievement to come lead a program?
Well, I think we've touched on some of those factors. Then there's some work you can do, obviously, in advance. Ed talked about the winning culture, being part of winning programs, the mentorship, who they've been around, the types of programs, and so on. But really, you got to get in a room with them. Mm-hmm. And when you get in a room with them, again, I think it's about making that, because you've vetted so much of them, and there's so much nowadays you can learn about them before you do that. But when you get in a room with them, it's about, is this somebody that I can, they've got my back, I've got theirs, we can go to battle together, support one another. It's a true partnership. And so one, is it somebody that I can have that type of relationship with, that we can be open and candid and trusting, because there is a lot of pressure. And we know that. And we know that if we're asking them to do 12 things and we're asking them to do them at a certain standard, that one of those things disproportionately impacts their livelihood, and that's winning. So again, we've got to have that relationship with them. And so for me, it's always been about, again, what makes them tick. But at the end of the day, and Ed said it well, do we believe in the same things? Do we value the same things? And do we share a vision for our program? And if we do, then that it's a gut check on, is this somebody that again I want to have that journey with? And because at the end of the day, and we know this, a lot of people want to influence the hire and have input in the hiring process. But if things don't work out, that impacts us and it impacts the coach. And so it's really important to me that it's the type of person I can have a strong, trusting relationship with.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, you can get into sort of the things like what's your practice week going to look like, and if you want to get into it. But the reality is, can you see that person being your head coach? Are they going to do those things that you believe in, and making sure that they're running your programming and giving the kids that experience? We talk about really being three things for any of our head coaches, but certainly first-time head coaches. Are they going to be really good in the community? Are they going to be really, really good at developing student athletes? And I think that's the other part. We're all in that part right now. It can't be just we're going to tell the kids what they want. You're going to be able to build those relationships with the student athletes and make it that they want to really develop a lot. And how much are you going to be able to be a leader on our campus, right? And you have to spend time with them. There's no other way, whether it's on the phone or you get in the room with them, or I've done searches where I've talked to the last three candidates 5 or 6 times on the phone just so I can know for sure. I have a little more confidence doing it now than I did back then, but you have to know, and you can't compromise who you are because you bring in someone who everyone else tells you. And I think that's the other part of it. You get a lot of people in your ear telling you when they haven't done it, they haven't called a timeout yet. That's a really hard one to kind of believe. You have to know for yourself.
That's great. Well, gut check, instinct. So is there a difference in sport? Is there, Olympic sports versus, traditional revenue sports, football, basketball? Or do you kind of across the board evaluate basically the same way?
I tend to evaluate very, very similar to what I've described regardless of sport, because again, I think our student athletes, we all want the student athlete experience to be the same regardless of what sport you're participating in. So in order to do that, you've got to have that continuity of again, values, culture, leadership, vision, and so I think that's very important. And and Ed deals with it. When we get a call from a student athlete come into our office with a situation or a call from a parent or whatever it might be, it doesn't matter what sport they're in. It's somebody's son or somebody's daughter.
Absolutely.
And so I take a very similar approach with all hires.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to, right? You have to make sure they fit your culture of your department. We all work so hard to build culture, and it takes a long time to build culture. Rick and I were talking about that before we went on air. I mean, it's a hard thing to do. So you want to hire coaches that fit who you are. At VCU for us, I mean, we have to hire grinders. You have to be a grinder to be able to be successful for us, because you have to. We don't have all the resources where our expectations are, right? And a lot of us don't. So making sure we hire those grinders. It doesn't matter if it's my track coach or my basketball coach. Someone who's going to have to work really hard and know the value of the hard work and fit who our university is too. I mean, we are a very blue collar university and we're very proud of that. But you have to have that mentality going in, and if you don't fit the mentality of the university, then you got no chance whatsoever.
To build on Ed's point, I think the other approach that's important is I want to make sure that head coach understands to the best of his or her ability during that process who we are and how we're resourced and what our expectations and standards are as well, because and that's the great thing about when you're making the hires, you get to do those things on the front end. Because to Ed's point, we put together a booklet with every piece of information we could possibly think of about our program, good, bad, and ugly, and how we compared within the league and certain peer groups, and we gave it to them in advance, and because I want them, I want as few surprises as possible, and I want them to come in, and I don't want, if there's going to be an issue, I want there to be an issue prior to that hire. Particularly if it's a significant issue. And so I think our job is also to educate them as much as we can so that they can evaluate who we are, the institution, again, and see if there's alignment there, because it's like getting married, right? You want to, if there's something going on here, let's figure that out before we get to the altar. And so I think it's very important, that's a very important part of the process for us too, is to provide as much information to them, again, in a very candid and honest way. So that when they do get on board, that trust is already developed, because there's not a gotcha moment.
Well, you don't want the coaches, I've heard coaches say a lot, you don't want the coaches to say, this place is a lot worse than they told me it was. There's so many more problems than they told me. I mean, we've all heard coaches say that, right? And that's fine. But if you have that trust built up ahead of time, they're not going to say that. I mean, I'm a big believer in transparency, like you are. Tell them all the good, bad, and the ugly. It doesn't matter. I mean, it's not going to change day one. So you got to make sure you have all those pieces in place, and you just lay it out for them, make sure they fit you.
Right. You have to make sure the expectations don't outweigh the commitment, too.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt.
Great. Well, so let's skip a little bit forward. So a coach has been there, first-time head coach for a year. They're going into year 2. What are some things that you look to counsel them on? How do you evaluate them after their first year? How do you help them get better in their second year?
Well, again, Ed touched on the importance of having a presence with them in that first year, maybe even more so than usual. And so hopefully when you get to the end of the first year, a lot of the conversations have taken place. But it is about stepping back together and looking maybe, zooming out a little bit to say, okay, now what based on all maybe the little things that occurred or that we learned or that we discussed, how can I help going into year 2 to facilitate success and to help build upon what we did, take the lessons that we learned, and make sure we continue to improve and get better. And so I think it's a partnership. I'll use that word again. And so hopefully what you're doing is you're sitting down together in that spirit to go through and to say, hey, this was a theme. Now, what are we going to do about it? And how can I help make this better?
Yeah, I'm sure we've all seen, like, year 2 is always the hardest. There is, because your expectations of them are a little higher. Their expectations of themselves are a little higher. But, the student athletes who all had a fresh start in year 1 don't have that fresh start anymore in year 2. And they've brought in a bunch of recruits who they've been telling everyone are better than the kids they have, most likely if it's a rebuilding job, right? So year 2 is hard, and it's about sitting down with them and making sure you are in lockstep with them of expectations and what you're going to be able to do to help. It's not an easy one for them to come in because in year 1 because they're new, but in year 2 they have a little sense of confidence. Sometimes it's probably a little too much confidence than they need to have, but you also want to encourage them because you're trying to build it with them, and that's a really hard thing to do. So staying in lockstep with them all the time and making sure they understand you're with them and measuring your expectations, I think is critically important. I mean, year 2 is a hard one. It's a really, really hard one. That's when the revolts usually start too. So you kind of have to quell those rebellions.
That's terrific. Do you all have anything to add? Anything that's on your mind about this subject that you want to share with the Athletic Director University?
Well, look, we're always learning, and Ed and I were talking. It's nobody gets every hire right, but yet when you hire head coaches, and particularly head coaches in the more visible sports, there's a lot of judgment that takes place, and we've talked about that pressure, and so I think just to sit and I've learned today, listening to Ed and seeing how he approaches things and his demeanor. And so I have great respect for what he's done and what other colleagues do when you hire coaches, because very, very good athletic directors get it wrong, like we were talking. And but yet so much of an emphasis is put on that. And so I'm glad I'm not a coach, I'll say that. I think it's a very, very tough job, and hopefully we can continue to do some things legislatively and otherwise to help with their work-life situation, and because it's really, so I have great respect for coaches, and I think that as an administrator, sometimes, coaches and administrators there can be some tension. I've seen that before, and so I would just encourage everybody, again, we're only as successful as they are. They're the ones that are influencing our student athletes on a daily basis. And so it's our jobs to try to get the right ones in there, develop that culture, make sure that they're helping to better the young men and women in our programs, and to support them. And luckily I've gotten to work with some great ones, and appreciate the ones we have at SMU, and just want to thank Ed again for some of the wisdom that he's passed along to me as we've been sitting here today.
There's no new information in this, you know that. But I'd say 2 things really. I mean, anyone making a first-time hire, be true to who you are, right? I mean, I think don't hire someone that you don't feel comfortable with because other people are telling you that this person's ready to be head coach, right? That know who you are. Whether you're hiring a first-time head coach or someone who's coached in Division II to be a first-time Division I head coach, don't assume that they know everything either, right? I mean, don't assume that they know those things. It's always easier to ask questions and get an answer that you like to hear than to not ask the question and find out something you don't want to know, right? So if you can do those things and ask those questions and don't assume, We've all gotten them wrong, and we'll all continue to get them wrong at some point, but making sure you stay true to who you are, you give yourself a whole lot better chance of getting it right.